Welcome to this special episode for this season's Reflection podcast. I've been wanting to do a Christmas episode since we first started, and I was thinking about, all right, now it seems to be the time. We've talked about Easter, we've talked about the Reformation, we've talked about Thanksgiving, now it's time to look at Christmas. And the idea came to me, let's take a look at some of the Old Testament prophecies that foretell the birth of Jesus. And who better to talk about the Old Testament than our old friend Chad Bird, who's been on the podcast many times before. He is the scholar in residence at 1517. I'll tell you a little bit more about him in this episode. And we're going to talk about 4 prophecies in the Old Testament that tell us where Jesus will be born, the events surrounding Jesus' birth, and who he grows up to be. This is called Written in the Scrolls, Born in the Straw, Old Testament Roots of Christmas with Chad Bird on this episode of the Reflection Podcast. In the pastor's office with me today, returning guest, my friend Chad Bird. Welcome back, Chad.
Thank you, Ed. Good to be here.
Today we are going to have a special discussion, a special type of, maybe interview isn't quite the right word for this, but I asked Chad to come in because I typically like to do a special episode at the end of each season. And I've done some Thanksgiving episodes, and I've done a Reformation episode. Chad actually came in and we did an Easter episode looking at the Passover and the Lord's Supper. This year it's Christmas, and so I wanted to look at some of the Old Testament prophecies leading up to and then cluing us in what was going to happen in Bethlehem. And who better to turn to than Chad, who's scholar in residence at 1517.org. We have all the links for Chad, and he is a prolific author. I can't even count how many books you've got out there, but I know your latest one is actually behind over your shoulder there, Untamed Prayers. And that's an excellent book. And we talked about that a couple months ago when it first came out. So I pray that it's going well and it's selling well and people are really getting a lot out of it. So I wanted to get into this time of year. When we're recording it, it's about a week before Thanksgiving, but when you're listening to this, it's going to be in the Advent season. And Advent is a special word in the church that means it's coming. And what's coming? Well, Jesus is coming. Second Advent, of course, but there was a first Advent. And that's what we want to look at today. So let's jump right in and talk about this. This is one of my favorite times of year because of the anticipation. I guess the older I get, the more I love the anticipation of the holiday season. And I think it had a lot to do with having kids, to see that joy in their eyes of Christmas is coming. And of course, as a pastor's family, we were putting all things up early because we had to get ready early with all the Advent seasons. So Advent and Christmas is rich in history, rich in tradition, the music, the stories, on and on, movies and TV shows. But the story is much more than just simply a baby born in Bethlehem, isn't it? I mean, we often just reduce it down to a little child in Bethlehem, but it's a lot more to it, isn't it?
Yeah, I echo everything you said about Advent and Christmas. As an Old Testament scholar, Advent is one of my favorite seasons because Advent happens to be one of the most Old Testament rich kind of seasons. We kind of go back in time, as it were. We're getting ready for the coming of Christ, as you say, not just as an infant, but in all the various ways in which he was fulfilling prophecy and bringing about the redemption of mankind through his teaching, through his miracles, and of course, ultimately through his crucifixion and his resurrection. So Advent comprises all of that. And it's so Old Testament rich because we're drawn back into the writings of the Torah and the prophets and the Psalms to see there that everything that we celebrate in Advent had been foretold centuries before it actually took place. So that you could really, in some ways, you could describe the Old Testament as the pre-biography of Jesus, in the sense that the rough outline of who he was to be, what he was to accomplish, a lot of details concerning him was already laid out in the Old Testament before he actually arrived on the scene.
I was thinking about that because of all the events in human history, and obviously there have been many, many events, but it seems to me that the birth of Jesus had the largest number of clues of when it was going to happen, where it was going to happen, who it was going to be. Is that true? Do you think that's true that the birth of Jesus has the most prophecies attached to it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, sometimes we'll talk about predictions or prognostications that people might put forward about what's going to happen. And sometimes, like in the modern area, maybe somebody will say something in the 1960s, which almost kind of foreshadowed or predicted what was going to happen with the advent maybe of social media or whatever it might be. Yeah, those things happen, and that's just based upon very sharp minds kind of diagnosing where we're at as a culture and where they see us heading. And so they'll make a prognostication. Well, that's fine and that's true, but that pales in comparison to the very specific kinds of prophecies, not just kind of predictions or prognostications, but actually prophecies of what is going to happen with the birth and the ministry of Jesus.
How many prophecies are there in the Old Testament of Jesus?
Well, it kind of depends on your parameters. So you'll see numbers anywhere from 50 to 300. And
Wow.
the reason there's such a divergence there is because it kind of depends on how you define prophecy. So if you're defining prophecy very narrowly as a verbal prophecy, such as where Jesus is to be born or what kind of mother he's supposed to have, well, then your number narrows down to probably anywhere from the 50 to 70 range. But if you widen that to talk about typologies or illusions or maybe things that also include the nation of Israel and the Messiah's mission to them, then that's going to widen to hundreds. So it just kind of depends on how you define it. But let's just say a very ample number of prophecies and foreshadowings that point us toward what he is to accomplish.
I love that there is so much. As you said, from Genesis to Malachi, the 39 books of most Bibles, the Old Testament, is really does lend itself to everything that I love about Christmas is all the tradition and the anticipation of things coming up, and so much of Christmas is just waiting, 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 waiting until that moment it happens, and uh, but when Jesus is finally born, I've heard it said that not too many people really knew about the birth of Jesus. Obviously, Mary, Joseph, and a bunch of shepherds. And but you think that's true, regardless of the hundreds of prophecies that people had available to them? Do you think it's true that it wasn't until years later that people knew that Jesus was here?
Yeah, it seems that there was a pretty small group at first. Yeah, people certainly that knew Mary, Mary and Joseph, maybe some folks not only with the shepherds but in the town of Bethlehem, and then certainly when Jesus was growing up, there were probably at least some folks who knew about what Mary and Joseph knew with regard to Jesus. But it's really not until his ministry and he actually begins to perform miracles and to teach that word begins to spread. And that was probably by divine design because you got to think about it. You need Jesus to grow up. I mean, he needs to mature. He needs to become a man before it's really ready for that message to get out. And think about how many times too in the Gospels Jesus would kind of put the brakes on situations. He's like, "Listen, don't go tell anybody." And the reason was he didn't want to create kind of a messianic fervor that would get out of control and that would actually prevent him from doing the very things that he came to do. I mean, think about when people wanted to make him a bread king or keep him in this one little area so he could heal all the people there. And Jesus is like, listen, I got a lot to do. I got to teach in all these villages. I got to make it to Jerusalem. And so if the fervor over the Messiah coming would have gotten kind of out of hand, it would have actually been detrimental to the fulfillment of his mission. So he kind of pushes that until, especially the resurrection,
Right.
when now you have this explosion of the good news going forth.
He would not have been a good social influencer, would he? Or media
That's right.
influencer, because
Yes.
he didn't draw attention to himself until yeah, I can imagine just he's got to be able to move, and
Yes.
had the feeding of the 5,000 is probably the best example that I can think of, is that he had to put the brakes on that because it would have been all kinds of things. I would have a domino effect of all kinds of things. Well, we're going to look at four prophecies in this episode. Two of them are probably the most well-known of all the Christmas prophecies, but two of them, I loved how you picked this, and I looked at these, and it's like, oh yeah, I guess I had remembered that from my days, 30, 40 years ago of studying this stuff at school, but I think they're no less important or meaningful. So, our first prophecy actually is from Isaiah, and it's Isaiah 9:6, and I have to pull it up so that I can read it for us. And I have it here as soon as I think I do anyway. Let me take a look. Here it is. But you, nope, that's Micah. Here we go. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Now, most people have known Isaiah 9:6, probably because of Handel's Messiah.
Hmm.
But that is the first of the prophecies we're going to dig into. So, what can you tell us about this prophecy here a little bit?
Yeah, to just first of all kind of widen out our scope just a little bit, we have to bear in mind that this is one verse from one chapter in, of course, a whole book of Isaiah. And what Isaiah does in many different ways is present to us who this particular individual is going to be. And he talks about him in different ways. Now, people might be familiar with the servant songs, for instance, that begin later in Isaiah, where you have all of this description of this servant of the Lord who does various things. He has a mission to the Jews as well as to the Gentiles, and he's bringing justice, he's bringing the Torah. But of course, you have the culmination of that in the suffering that he experiences in Isaiah 53. But then earlier in the book, you have examples like you just read, where it's more of a focus not upon him being a servant as being upon a king, a ruler of some sort. And in particular, he's not going to be just another ruler, and he's not going to be a king that's, as it were, disassociated with Israel. He's actually going to come from Jesse, from the line of Jesse, of course, was the father of David. And that's why you have some of this language like prince and government, and even father being used as a title for rulers. All right. So we have pictured here a ruler, a king who is to come from the line of David. And we start out with something that, yeah, is very fitting for what we might think of as a human ruler. He is a child, he is a son, a Yeled and a Ben in Hebrew. And these are not anywhere near kind of technical words. They're just a child, a son. All right. But keep reading. What's going to happen? Well, he's going to carry the weight of the government on his shoulders. The ruling vocation that he's given, it's going to be borne by him. And then you have this list of names. And it's these names that really grab our attention because these alert us to the fact that, oh, this isn't just kind of a David 2.0. This is not another Josiah or Hezekiah, both of whom were good kings. This guy is extremely different because he is, you could translate this either as two names or as one, but I think it goes as two. So wonderful counselor. And then he's mighty God. Wow. Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Those titles alert you to the fact that this isn't just another human child, not just another human son. He is, first of all, when it says wonderful counselor, the Hebrew there is Pele. And Pele is often used kind of with a sense of supernatural. It's the closest thing Hebrew gets to the word like supernatural. And it's used in other contexts to describe the coming of this divine messenger who bears the words of God to certain people. So he's not just a wise counselor, he's a supernatural counselor. And then you have him described as mighty God, which is just kind of blows you away because then you realize, oh, so he's a son, he's a child, but he's also at the same time divine. He's a mighty God. He's El, which is the Hebrew word for God. So now we're like, oh, well, he's God and he's also man. And then he's described as everlasting Father. Now, this gets a little confusing because, of course, when we think Father, we think our Father who art in heaven, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. But throughout the Old Testament, you have Father also used not in designation to the Heavenly Father, but to someone who exercises a paternal vocation. So you might think of a king as the father of the nation, or you have the father of a clan. That doesn't mean he's the father of everyone in this clan or the father of everyone in this nation. Rather, he serves as this paternal kind of leader, except this father is everlasting. He's from all eternity. And then finally, he's the Prince of Peace. His government, his rule is going to bring not warfare, but peace. And of this government peace, there will be no end.
I was
So
gonna,
the
yeah, I was gonna ask you about the names in the English. It's a double name, wonderful counselor, comma, mighty God, comma, but it's actually maybe eight or seven or more than just the four titles, isn't it?
Yeah, it kind of depends on how you want to divide these up. Uh, it's more kind of the cumulative effect, though.
Okay.
Yeah, you take all these together, and they all communicate the fact that this is not just another Davidic king, not just another kind of really awesome David that's coming. He is in the line of David, and he's going to inherit the throne of his father David. And yet, the exercise of rule and peace and the titles that are ascribed to him indicate that he is, in fact, not kind of an angelic human or a superhuman, but in fact that he is both man and mighty God. So here we have the two natures of Christ
Yeah.
already here in Isaiah. I'm always telling people, listen, whatever you're teaching in the church, you can find that teaching already in the Old Testament. Maybe not in full form, but it's certainly there, sketched out for us. And here you have the dual nature of Christ, the fact that he's 100% divine and 100% human, not sketched out, but I mean, it's like just laid out there for us in black and white. So before Jesus arrives, we already know he's going to be both a child, a son, but also at the same time a wonderful counselor or supernatural counselor and mighty God uh, in in his person as well as in his vocations.
So we have basically two main Christian teachings: the divine nature of Christ and the human nature of Christ. So that's that. He's a very special person. I think he's the only one that ever is fully divine and fully human. Already, that's not something that was invented by the Christian church. It was
Yeah.
something. How many years before Isaiah's what? Sixth century, seventh century, something like that.
Yeah, Isaiah's in the so he's in the 8th century. He's around the mid 700s, same as Micah that we'll talk about next. So
Mhm.
Micah and Isaiah are basically contemporaries. So I mean, we're talking, yeah, 700 years before the birth of Christ. Just today, we I looking at my social media posting, and someone said that the divinity of Jesus was decided by vote at the Council of Nicaea in the 300s AD. And I just had to laugh because not only is it just kind of silly and sloppy history and untrue, but I mean, we're talking what a millennia before that. In the time of Isaiah, already there, the Messiah is described as actually fully divine as well as fully human.
That's what happens when you use Dan Brown as your source of history instead of the Bible. Uh,
This is true. This is true.
um, and so I don't want to belabor this issue, but this actually is a text that can be used to debate or even refute one of the heresies that did crop up after Jesus in the early parts of the church, that he was not divine, or not, at least
Yeah.
not fully divine.
Yeah, that was one of the earliest heresies that the church had to confront and to bring some clarity to. In fact, for those Christians who confess the creed, such as the Nicene Creed, that's the reason we have language in that Nicene Creed, such as God of God, light of light, very God of very God, and then this very important phrase, begotten, not made, being of one substance with the Father, or one nature with the Father. Now, the reason that language was used in the Creed was to explicitly refute Arius, who had been a leader in the church and had begun to teach that there was a time when the Son of God did not exist, that he was actually a creature. the same heresy that's still embraced by Jehovah Witnesses and many other groups today. So if you're talking with someone who questions or denies the deity of Jesus, the fact that he is fully God and fully man, of one nature with the Father, well, you can turn to lots of New Testament text, but you don't have to just constrict. You don't have to just stay there. You can also look in Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6 is a great example for that.
So yeah, I did have the question in my notes about why this prophecy is important. That's one of the main reasons for this prophecy, isn't it? It's to really show us when we talk about Jesus, this is who we're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. All
Yep.
right,
This is
let's
the one who was comes in the throne of David, but at the same time he sits at the right hand of the Father.
we
So
will
all
talk
of that
about his
together.
lineage as well a little bit later on. But let's move then to one of Isaiah's contemporaries, and that would be Micah, the prophet Micah. And this is probably everybody knows this prophet, this Christmas prophecy because of certain Christmas carols. But the it's Micah chapter 5, verse 2. But you, O Bethlehem Ephrathah, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to be ruler in Israel, whose coming forth is from of old, from ancient days. So again, maybe you need to bring us into context of since this is chapter 5 of Micah. What's happening here?
Yeah, so one of the things that was faced in the days of both Micah as well as Isaiah historically is you have the newest superpower on the scene are the Assyrians. And the Assyrians are working their way westward. And eventually they're making their way into the northern kingdom, which was called Israel. And then eventually they do conquer Israel. That's when you have the deportation of the 10 northern tribes. Samaria is conquered, is destroyed. And so if you hear talk of the lost tribes of Israel, that's what they're talking about, these 10 northern tribes that are defeated by the Assyrians and then hauled off into exile. And even though not every single individual was exiled, some of them escaped south. Most of them were, and so you have the northern kingdom is devastated. Well, then the Assyrians keep moving southward, and they attack various cities in Judah. Eventually, they even make this stunning artwork on their palace walls where they show the Assyrian army destroying the Judean city of Lachish. I mean, it's just a horrific scene of devastation. So, and then they surround Jerusalem. Hezekiah is king. Jerusalem is now surrounded, and the Assyrian army is threatening them. And that's kind of the background here of verse 1, where you have the mustering of troops and the judge of Israel is stricken with a rod on the cheek. This is all describing how the Assyrians are trying to destroy the people of Judah. And of course, this is a scary time if you're in Jerusalem. Scary time if you're in Judah, because you're wondering, is there any hope for us left? Are we going to be destroyed? Now, you can read the story in Kings. Basically, what happens is the messenger of God comes and he wipes out a huge amount of the Assyrian army. They flee, and Jerusalem is spared. But in the midst of this kind of scary time with a lot of uncertainty, and and also the fact that it becomes clear that we need something besides another kind of Davidic leader on the throne. I mean, Hezekiah was a great king, not the best. Josiah was the best after David, but we still need something else. We need a king who's going to out king all the other human kings that Judah had had. And then that then leads into verse 2 and the coming forth of this new ruler for the people of Israel.
So what is this verse telling us about Jesus?
It's telling us, first of all, that where he's going to be born. So this is one of these very specific kinds of prophecies, all right? So, but you, O Bethlehem Ephrathah. So Bethlehem, we're all familiar with the little town of Bethlehem. It really was a village. This was not a metropolis. It wasn't a New York City. It wasn't a Jerusalem. It was just a small place, about 6, 7 miles from Jerusalem. So we might think of it today as a village suburb, maybe to combine the ancient and the modern terminology. Ephrathah is the name of the region that it's in. So we think, I don't know, maybe Chicago, Illinois, or choose a small town. Like I grew up in Shamrock, Texas. We might say Shamrock in Wheeler County. That's what Bethlehem Ephrathah means. So it's telling us where he's to be born. And why? Because that's where David was born.
Mhm.
So David was from Bethlehem, and David was told way back in 2 Samuel 7 that God was going to raise up one of his descendants to sit on his throne and reign over an everlasting kingdom. So that's why this one who comes to fulfill that prophecy is actually born in David's hometown. But notice the the diminutive way in which Bethlehem is described, too little to be among the clans of Judah. So we might say, from this backwater community, from this small town, which was really nothing more than a village, that people knew about, but no one would have said, "Oh yeah, definitely Bethlehem's the place." From you, he says, is going to come forth from me this ruler in Israel, and not just any old ruler, but one whose coming forth is from of old, from ancient days. And that word for ancient is olam. That could also be translated everlasting. It has some ambiguity to it. It can be referred to a long time ago. It's also the word that's translated as forever or everlasting in the Old Testament. So you could say, whose coming forth is from of old, and then say something like, not just from of old, but listen, he's from ancient or everlasting days. Well, that cannot describe. That cannot describe a human being. You don't describe a human being who's going to be born and being king as someone from ancient days. No one is like that unless this particular individual supersedes time. He's greater than our human limitations. So this is pointing to the divine, eternal existence of the Son of God, who comes into Bethlehem to be born, but his origins are not from, you know, 40 weeks beforehand in his mother's womb. His origins are from the eternity before even the world came into existence.
So this prophecy is not just a geographical prophecy.
Yeah, it's a geographical, and it's a deeply Christological and Trinitarian prophecy. That is, it's telling us about who Christ is. Again, like we talked about with Isaiah 9:6, in his divine and his human natures. He's born in Bethlehem, but he's eternally begotten by the Father. He's the son of Mary, born to Mary in this village. At the same time, he's the son of the Father, who never did not exist, who has always been, just like God has always been Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
That touches on why I thought this episode was really why I wanted to do it, because Christmas is just not simply about the birth of a baby in Bethlehem. There is so much implication to this, that this is actually the moment in history where everything changes. I mean,
Yeah.
in fact, everything up to that point was pointing to this, moving towards this, and everything from that point on, it flows right out of it. I mean, yes, in the Christian church, I know that Easter, the resurrection of Jesus, is tantamount. This is it. This is what we do. But without Christmas, there's no Easter. He has to be
Yes.
born to be able to die and rise. So
Yeah.
that's why I think it's so important. And we're looking at this in not just little town of Bethlehem, but in this prophecy is the eternal nature of Christ. He is both God and man, the unique God man, as some have called it. I do want to. Just because I'm so curious, I read about this just a few years ago, that there are some people who are making the case that this is not the Bethlehem outside of Jerusalem is not where Jesus was born. That there's another
Yeah.
Bethlehem up north, I think, up in Galilee or in that area. Can you touch on that just briefly?
Yeah, there is. And this isn't just restricted to Bethlehem. There are other towns which share the same name. And of course, we have the same thing today. I mean, you look up any name of any town, and there's probably that same name town in 3 to 10 of our United States. So it wasn't much different back in the days of Judea. So there is a Bethlehem in the north, and there is this Bethlehem. So what would discredit the Bethlehem in the north from being the real Bethlehem where Jesus was born? Well, a couple different things. And the main thing is because the Bethlehem in the north is not David's town. We know that he was born in this particular Bethlehem, Bethlehem Ephrathah, which is right outside of Jerusalem. And then the second thing would be think about the story related to Matthew when the Magi show up. They go to Jerusalem, they talk to Herod, and they find out from Herod, who finds out from the biblical scholars of the day where the Messiah is to be born. And they all point to Bethlehem, and that's where the wise men go. So that makes the most sense if they would have just left Bethlehem and went a few miles to the south and went to that particular Bethlehem. So, but yeah, there are actually two Bethlehems, but the one with by far the most evidence behind it would be
Sure.
David's hometown.
Yeah, and even the angels themselves in Luke 2 tell the shepherds where to go. For unto you is
Yes,
born this day in the city of David. And
yes.
yes, you could, I guess you could make the case Jerusalem is actually the city of David, but the original city where his origin is Bethlehem, a little bit to the south and east. I guess I'm assuming it's southeast of Jerusalem if I remember my geography.
Yeah, when you're there today, you don't even realize you've left Jerusalem until you
Right.
go through the military walls. Then you realize, oh, things have changed.
Um, so the next two prophecies are not necessarily when you read these, you don't think Christmas. I mean, I don't think there's any
Sure.
songs written about them. There's no
Right.
Christmas carols about these, for the most part, anyway. Unless you dig a little bit deeper here. But let's take a look at the first one, and it's Genesis chapter 49. So first book of the Bible, but towards the end of the book. And it's a little bit longer than our other ones. It's verses 8 through 12. And it says this: Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's cub. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He stooped down, he crouched as a lion, and as a lioness, who dares rouse him? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples, binding his foal to the vine and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He has washed his garments in wine, and his vesture in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth whiter than milk. Okay, so obviously Jesus has pretty teeth, but he's got dark eyes. No, no, what is this text actually telling us about Jesus?
Yeah, I mean, isn't it really clear? I mean, no need to explain anything here. Yeah, this is a. I was just kind of smiling to myself, laughing to myself when you read it because this would actually make some beautiful hymn lyrics
It
if
would.
someone wanted to tackle this because the imagery alone is so gripping. Think about it. You got lions, you got a ruler's staff, you've got the image of donkeys and vines and milk and wine. There's so much to work with here. So I'll be real brief because we could spend a lot of time on this. Keep in mind, first of all, the context. Genesis 49 is at the end of Jacob's life. He and his entire family have been brought down into Egypt by Joseph. Jacob is going to speak a word of, you could call it blessing or prediction over each of his sons. And now he's gotten to his fourth born son, who is Judah. And Judah's name is formed from the verb for praise. And so when he starts out saying, Judah, your brother shall praise you, he's punning on Judah's name. Now, there's a lot of backstory to this that I'm not going to be able to get into, even though I'm fighting that temptation. I'm actually writing on this part of Genesis right now. So I'm using all my self restraint I can muster not to go down a lot of rabbit holes. So I'll keep focused here. So we might have expected that Joseph kind of would be the chosen one, right? We know that Jacob loved him. We know that Joseph did a lot of great things. But instead, the blessing of the messianic promise is not given to the tribe of Joseph. It's given to the tribe of Judah, which is what this is all about. So keep in mind, when you start out in Genesis, God gives a promise of this seed to come that's going to be the seed of a woman. Well, that's, of course, a very general statement. Which woman, which family, which line? And then throughout the Old Testament, you have a narrowing. So from Eve's seed, from a woman's seed, and then Genesis 12, we realize it's going to be the family of Abraham. And then from Abraham, it's not going to be Ishmael, but Isaac. And from Isaac, it's not going to be Esau, but Jacob. And then from Jacob, it's not going to be any of his other sons, but now it's Judah. So now we know the Messiah is going to come from the tribe of Judah. Later on, we hear it's going to be from the family of David, who's in the tribe of Judah. So how's he described here? Was described in militaristic terms. He's going to have his hand on the neck of his enemies. He's going to be powerful against his enemies. His father's sons are going to bow down to him. So he's going to be the one from whom the king comes, and all the tribes will bow down to him. He is a lion. This is where we get the language of the lion of the tribe of Judah that you hear about in Revelation. Lions are a picture of royalty and of power. Of course, we still refer to them as the king. So he's the lion-like king. And verse 10 kind of shifts from metaphor to reality. He's got the scepter, the ruling staff, and that's going to be between his feet. Tribute's going to come to him. There's a whole discussion we could have about the Hebrew behind tribute. This is sometimes translated as Shiloh, but we can
Hmm.
discuss that if we have time. But tribute's going to come to him, and then at the very end, the image of a donkey's colt tied to the vine, and his garments washed in wine, his vested in the blood of grapes, and his eyes darker than wine. All of this is poetic language to describe basically his kingdom is going to be so rich, so abundant in all these blessings that, hey, we'll just wash our clothing in wine. I mean, there's like so much of it. That's the idea, this profusion of wine in the kingdom of this ruler who comes from the tribe of Judah.
So this isn't really just as Christology. There's eschatology in here, isn't there?
Yes. Yes.
I love
Yeah.
I just use that word in a sermon, so my parishioners know that word a little bit better here. But I hear Revelation, the book of Revelation language here.
Yeah, very much so. Lion of the tribe of Judah is there. The whole image of lions is there, and then yeah, the profusion of blessings, which is pictured here metaphorically as wine overflowing. And you have other prophets that talk about the coming of the Messiah is going to be a pouring out of wine. That's behind the first miracle that is recorded in the
Hmm.
Gospel of John, where Jesus changes water into wine, because the messianic kingdom is going to be signaled by all this wine, and that traces ultimately back to Genesis chapter 49. So this prophecy teaches us, okay, the Messiah is going to come from the tribe of Judah. He's going to be a ruler. He's going to be one who conquers. He's going to be the one who produces a kingdom that is just abounding in God's richness. And he's going to be the one that everybody bows down to because he's the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords.
Yeah, in fact, people might be listening to this podcast in the early stages of the Advent season. So the beginning of December, we actually have the story of Palm Sunday as one
Mm.
of the readings that you could read in church in December, as well as towards the spring and Holy Week. And I hear that in here too, with the foal of a donkey's colt. That's very much Palm Sunday language, isn't it?
It is. This is the beginning of a whole group of text and images that you see from Genesis onward, where the Messiah's kingdom is associated with a donkey or a colt. Think of when David was about to die, he designated Solomon as his successor in the opening chapters of First Kings. And Solomon then is given David's mule to ride into Jerusalem on. And the people are shouting. It's a Palm Sunday kind of festival atmosphere. So you have Genesis 49, you have First Kings 1 and 2, and then you have the prophecy from Zechariah about the Messiah is going to come riding in. So all of that is behind what happens on Palm Sunday.
That brings up a good point that I think that maybe we should emphasize is that when you're talking Old Testament prophecy, very much you're talking about a now, not yet type of way to look at it, because some of this stuff happened early on, and then it happened again with Jesus. And I get that impression here when you're talking about Solomon. That's sort of a now, this is the prophecy, but the not yet prophecy is that there's one coming who will be a son of David, a son of Solomon, and on to Jesus. And so Christmas is sort of the beginning of in the when we do it celebrate these holidays in the church is that now, but then we're always looking ahead, aren't we?
Yeah, there's kind of a build up. There's you call it a prophetic snowball effect, where the more that you're going along in the Old Testament, the more you begin to you see more clearly. Prophecy joins with foreshadowing type, so that by the time you get to the end, you got all this kind of constellation of prophecies and foreshadowings, which together are rolling us right into the ministry of Jesus, where he fulfills all of these.
So the Genesis 49 passage, and we'll move on to the last one in just a moment. But where why is this important to the Christmas story of all the passages we looked at? Why is this one part of the Christmas story?
This would, in particular, it would point to the fact of where his genealogy is going to come from. So if you look in the Gospel of Matthew, the opening chapter, or if you could look in the Gospel of Luke, Luke kind of saves the genealogy for the third chapter. But if you look at both of those, you have them tracing the genealogy of Jesus from different perspectives, all the way back to David, and even before him to Abraham, and Luke takes it all the way back to Adam.
Yep.
But genealogies have to do with, okay, where'd you come from? Why were you born of these particular parents? And this prophecy in Genesis 49 answers why that genealogical tree finds its way all the way back to Judah. And from Judah, therefore, you can trace it forward to David and then all the way to Jesus.
All right. So our last one. Who would have thought this would be the one we go with? But Numbers 24. Now, I'm sure I could probably count on one hand the number of people who are listening that have read Numbers. Because it's not one of those books that oh, I'm going to read Numbers now. If you're reading through the Bible, you usually you stop long before you get the numbers because you get bogged down in things. But Numbers 24:17, which says, I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. It shall crush the forehead of Moab and break down all the sons of Sheth. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah.
All right. Why are we in Numbers now for Christmas prophecies?
Yeah. Yeah. So, first of all, I wish we could retitle some of the biblical books. I mean, who wants to read Numbers unless you're accountant or something? In Hebrew, the title is in the wilderness, which I think it would be a more captivating
Oh
title. Like,
yeah.
well, okay, well, what happened in the wilderness? But yeah, it's not. I haven't yet met a person whose favorite book is Numbers. I'm sure they're out there, but it's not for most of us the book that we like to go to. However, that being said, there are some fascinating parts of the book of Numbers. And one of those is where we find ourselves today, because this is part of the oracles of a guy by the name of Balaam. Now, for those who maybe don't recognize the word name Balaam, maybe you have heard of a talking donkey in the Bible. Well, it turns out that talking donkey was Balaam's donkey. And this donkey had better spiritual apprehension than Balaam himself had, because he was able to see this threatening angel. And well, you could read the story for yourself. But what do you need to know about Balaam? First of all, we know he was a historical character, not just from the Bible, but we have actually archaeological finds which mentioned Balaam. So he was well known in the ancient world. And he's basically a gun for hire. He's a prophetic gun for hire. He's hired by the enemies of Israel to curse Israel, but God won't let him. And so what he does is he ends up pronouncing a whole series of blessings upon Israel, which as you would expect, angers the guy that hired him. But nonetheless, that's what happens. Now, when you get to Numbers 24, notice what he says. He says he's having in the previous verse, he talks about how he has this oracle and this vision. I see him, but not now. I
Hmm.
behold him, but not near. So with his prophetic eye, Balaam sees some person, some man, but not now, but not near. In other words, he is, if you can kind of picture this, it's like Balaam is standing on a high hill, and his prophetic eye, he's looking, and on the very, very distant chronological horizon, he sees him. Who is him? Who is this person that he sees? Well, it's going to be a star that comes out of Jacob and a scepter that's going to rise out of Israel. Israel, of course, is the nation. Jacob Jacob is another name for Israel. So we know that this star is going to come from Israel, the scepter from Jacob. So who might this be? Well, it's going to be obviously a ruler. One is going to shine like the stars, and he's going to crush the heads of the enemies of the people of God, who here are characterized as Moab and then the sons of Seth. And if you read on to verse 18, you have others mentioned as well. So you kind of put this together. You've got a prophet who sees a coming figure who's going to come out of Jacob slash Israel, and he's going to be a ruler. Well, this echoes what we just saw in Genesis 49, right? That from Judah, from Israel, specifically from the tribe of Judah, that's where you have this ruler coming forth. And he's not here yet, but he is coming. And when he comes, he's going to crush the forehead of the enemies of God. Now, let me say two things. First of all, we know, we know positively that this was understood to be a messianic prophecy by the Jews of Jesus' day. So if you read a little bit of Jewish history, this is already in the second century AD. So 132 to 135, you have a Jewish rebellion that takes place. So think about it. This is 100 years after Jesus was born and conducted his ministry. 100 years after that, there was a Jewish rebellion, and a famous rabbi by the name of Rabbi Akiba pointed to the leader of that rebellion and nicknamed him Bar Kokhba, which means son of a star. And he nicknamed him that based on this verse from Numbers 24:17. And he thought, this rabbi, thought that Bar Kokhba was the Messiah, which means that Rabbi Akiva and other Jews actually believed that this particular prophecy was a prophecy of the Messiah. And now, of course, they were utterly wrong about Bar Kokhba, but I pointed out because it shows us that we're not just kind of making up the fact that Jews believe these prophecies. They did believe these prophecies. You know, they didn't always identify the person who fulfilled them as correct, but they did believe these to be messianic prophecies. So that's the first thing. The second thing is when he crushes the forehead of Moab, I often call this the gospel of head crushing in the Old Testament. Beginning in Genesis 3:15, the promised seed crushes the head of the serpent. And then you have several different head crushing scenes, such as when David crushes the head of Goliath. A woman throws down a millstone in the book of Judges and crushes the head of Abimelech. And now we have this. You have Jael, who crushes the head of the enemy of the people of God who comes into her tent. So a number of incidents where the arch enemy of the people of God is killed by a blow to the head. And all that goes back to Genesis 3:15, and that is reflected here too in Numbers 24:17.
Amazing. I love that, and we have to have that discussion, I think, later on. That'd be a good title for a book, Gospel of Head Crushing.
Yeah.
So I hear we read about star. A star
Yeah.
shall come out of Jacob, and I would think, since we're talking about Christmas prophecies, are we correct? Or would we be okay equating that with the Star of Bethlehem?
Yeah. Yep. In fact, that was going to be where I was going to go next. So
Good.
perfect question. Yeah. So in fact, there are some people who believe, and I don't disbelieve this. I wish could actually prove it, but there are some people who believe that the reason that the wise men came from the east and followed this particular star was because they were Babylonian sages who were familiar with Jewish literature and had actually been acquainted with or taught this particular prophecy by the Jews in Babylon. And because of that, they followed that particular star because they realized that a star was coming out of Jacob. And it signaled the birth of a king, which of course fits perfectly with this. A scepter and a star coming out of Jacob slash Israel. We do know that there was a huge population of Jews living in Babylon.
Right.
In fact, for those who have heard about the Talmud, well, there were actually two Talmuds. There was one from the land of Israel, But there was the more famous of the Talmuds came from Babylon. It's the Babylonian Talmud. Well, why from Babylon? Because from the 6th century BC onward, you had a huge number of Jews and Jewish scholars living in Babylon, who, of course, had the scriptures, no doubt welcomed non-Jews to come into their synagogue, just like in the days of the New Testament. So chances are the Magi, these scholars, knew the prophecy from Numbers, and because of that, they followed the star that led them finally to the one who holds the scepter that came out of Israel.
Incredible. And so numbers right there should be top of the list
Yeah.
for messianic and Christmas prophecies. Well, I'm looking at the time. I want to wrap this up, and as we've been reflecting on these four prophecies, just the four of the could be anywhere from 50 to 300 of them. I want to give you the last word here, the last reflection that we have for today's special episode, kind of tying all this together.
Yeah, I think it's important for us to remember that when Jesus was born, what we had is, as you signaled, anywhere from 50 to 300 prophecies. There was an anticipation for the coming of the Messiah. People were waiting for him. People knew the prophecies. And so when Jesus comes and begins to gradually fulfill these, then all of a sudden you have these epiphanies that are going off in people's eyes. And that's why people are always saying, could this be the promised one? Is this the Messiah? Because they realize that Jesus is fulfilling these detail by detail. And so today, when we think as Christians that we confess that Jesus is the Messiah, we confess that he is the Christ, one of the reasons we do that is because he fulfilled all these prophecies. And so it's important for us to know them, to become familiar with them, so that we know why we believe what we believe. That he didn't just come and do what he did, he came and did what he did because it had all been laid out beforehand as to who he was to be and what he was to accomplish. Let me close with this thought. Remember when John was in prison and he sent disciples to Jesus saying, "Are you the coming one, or should we look for another?" Now, Jesus could have simply said, "Yes." Go back to John and tell him, "Yes." That's not how Jesus answered. He said, "Go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame are healed." He laid it kind of all out there. Now, why would Jesus answer that the way he did? Because Jesus is basically telling John, John, go back and read Isaiah. Go read these prophecies about what the Messiah was to do. Compare that with what I'm doing and see how they line up. In other words, study your messianic prophecies, John, and then you'll know that, in fact, I am the coming one. So Jesus gives us the same answer today. Am I the coming one? Well, did I fulfill all these prophecies? Yes. Well, there's your answer.
Chad Bird, scholar in residence at 1517.org. I'm so thankful you've opened up more of the Old Testament for us that we can richly understand, especially this time of year, the Christmas story of Jesus. Thank you so much, my friend. I know you've got books, and your latest book is Untamed. Uh, Help me
Untamed
out again. It's
prayers. Untamed
Untamed
prayers.
Prayers, right? It's looking at the Book of Psalms. We talked about this.
Yeah.
I've
Yes.
got so
Yes.
much prophecies in my head now. So, and
No, I
we'll
understand. Yeah.
we'll have links to all of those, and I'm looking forward to the next time we talk. God's blessings to you. Merry Christmas, my friend, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you, Ed. Merry Christmas.
Thank you, Chad, for sitting down with me for the last hour and really giving us a whole lot of insight into just how special Christmas is and how looked for it was for thousands of years and through hundreds of prophecies, of which we only looked at four. But so important and so enlightening. Thank you so much, Chad. And I thank you, the listener and the viewer, for this special episode, making it possible by watching the previous episodes and making season 5 of the Reflection Podcast very special to do this year. And I wanted to do something special to wrap it up. What better way to do that than to ask our dear friend Chad Bird to come back and give us some insight into the Christmas season. If you'd like to know more about Chad, you can go to 1517.org. There's a link in the description, or the show notes as they're sometimes called. And I've got a link to 1517.org and the bookstore where you can pick up all of the books that Chad has so far. There are also links to the other episodes that I have done with Chad on the Reflection podcast, and I also have links to Chad's podcast from 1517.org. Thank you again for listening and watching throughout these 5 seasons of the Reflection Podcast. Season 6 is in the works, and we are looking to come and drop some episodes very soon, most likely March of 2026. And I'm lining up the guests as we speak, and I'm looking forward to that. So, the Reflection Podcast is a ministry of St. Matthew Lutheran Church in Hawthorne Woods, Illinois. We would love to have you spend part of your Christmas holiday with us, or any time that you'd like to come. If you're in the northeast corner of Illinois, we're about an hour outside of Chicago, even closer to the airport in Chicago, O'Hare Airport, that is. If you'd like to plan a visit, go to our website at stmats.net, stmatts.net, to plan your visit. All of our worship services and many of our Bible studies are also streamed live as they happen, and then are available as recordings on our YouTube channel and our Facebook page. Links are also in the show notes. So we're just a few weeks, perhaps even days away as you're watching this or listening to it, to Christmas 2025. And I pray that you will have a very merry and blessed Christmas. And I'm looking forward to seeing you in the new year with Season 6 of the Reflection Podcast. God's richest blessings to you.